You're listening to the Heart of Giving podcast with Art Taylor, powered by bbbgive.org. Here we explore the motivations that form the basis of giving and service. We inspire generosity and celebrate the transformative effects that giving and service have on the human spirit and on community. The conversations featured on the podcast also uncover giving strategies that educate and provide tools to help listeners make impactful gifts of both their time and money. We hope you enjoy this episode.
Welcome to the Heart of Giving podcast, powered by bbbgive.org. Give.org is the nation's standards-based charity evaluator and your one-stop source for information on giving and reports on the most asked about charities. I'm Art Taylor, your host. Today we're going to talk about eating disorders, which are a major crisis in our country, especially now, given the pandemic, the number of people who are seeking help as a result of a eating disorder or a dysfunctional relationship with food has skyrocketed. And here today to discuss how to free yourself and how they are helping people free themselves from eating disorders is Dr. Carylynn Larson, Carrie Larson, who founded Rock Recovery back in 2008 after graduating from Center College, where she overcame her own eating disorder and dysfunctional relationship with food. She founded Rock Recovery because she saw a need in our society for programs that help people who left recovery programs and who need day-to-day interaction with counselors and others who are dealing with the eating disorder problem. And Rock Recovery is such an organization operating out of Arlington, Virginia. Dr. Carylynn Larson, also earned a doctorate in industrial organizational psychology from George Mason University, and she is now an adjunct faculty member at George Washington University. Carrie, welcome to the Heart of Giving podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Art.
Well, Carrie, as I mentioned in the intro, we're going to talk about eating, which is something that we all enjoy, or maybe some of us don't necessarily enjoy. And as I got to know your organization a bit, I came to understand that the pleasure that most of us get out of sitting down and having a meal is not quite the same with everyone. And that for some people, a meal is actually something that's dreaded. And your organization does a lot of work with people who have these kinds of problems. But maybe you could just start by just giving me and our audience some sense of what we mean when we say eating disorder. What are we talking about?
Yeah, it's such a great question. And part of my earliest work was actually recognizing that a lot of people don't know what that means. So, yeah, an eating disorder can manifest in a number of ways. There's no one sort of archetype of an eating disorder, but it's all based on the idea of sort of losing touch with what food is supposed to mean to us, which is, it's supposed to be something that nourishes us. Food is something that our body needs to be able to think clearly and to be able to be active and to enjoy our bodies and to be healthy. And so where food becomes something other than that, it's when it becomes something that we want to control, when it becomes something that we use extensively for comfort, and when it becomes something that we sort of overthink, right? That it becomes sort of obsessive in our minds. And so, I'll give a few examples there and some from my own experience. And I got into this and I founded this organization largely out of my own experience, in addition to having many friends who have struggled with eating disorders of various types. So one manifestation of an eating disorder is what you often hear of talked about as anorexia, right? Which is restricting your eating. And many people have the experience that food is something, if not the only thing that they feel in that moment that they can control. And so a lot of anorexia is actually based in I can control what I eat. So that will cascade into being extremely controlling, not only of what you eat, but also how much you eat. And all eating disorders become exceptionally difficult to treat because then it also cascades into a physical health condition where if your brain is not getting the nutrients that it needs because you are restricting either what you eat, like cutting out major food groups, or how much you eat, you're not getting the caloric intake that you need, your brain will not function as it needs to. And so it becomes not only a mental health condition, but also has a very real physical health implication. My story started with controlling food because a lot of things in my life were out of control at that time. But then there was a switch for me where I gave myself permission to eat again, and then I didn't know how to control it. And so food became a comfort. So I started to lean on food for comfort. And that often for me manifested as like binge eating, right? So I would start eating and want more and more and more of that comfort. And my brain did not know when to tell me to stop eating. So then I would have this huge guilt complex over how much I had just eaten. And I would feel sick. And for a lot of people, that sense of fullness will actually manifest as bulimia, like actually throwing that food back up. And it gets into this really wicked cycle of just sort of playing with, using, I should say. And it really is like an addiction. So it's very much using food as a sense of control, as a sense of comfort, and not more purely as something that nourishes your body in the right quantities, right? In the right ways.
So, if I were to ask you about your own experience, how were you able to get control of this cycle? How were you able to bring yourself back into a more healthy relationship with food?
That is the $1 million question that literally millions of people in the United States right now are wrestling with. And I guess I'll preface my answer by saying that a little bit of this is everyone needs to find their own path, but we have certainly found with Rock Recovery and our programs that there are some bedrocks of that. And a huge bedrock of it is actually letting go. So not trying to control something. That's the huge irony of this. In an effort to have control, you lose control. So I'd say for the first, I don't know, maybe month that I tried to control what I ate, I had control. After that first month, I no longer had control. I was unable to conceive of eating certain things. I was unable to conceive of eating more than a certain amount, and it became complete lack of control. And so actually, it wasn't so much about me regaining control as letting go of my entire decision-making process around food. And this is where a wonderful care and treatment team and support system can help. So for me, it was a process of working with, number one, a therapist to be willing to admit that this was something that was a problem, right? And that it wasn't just a coping strategy. It wasn't okay. It was actually a mental health condition. And then working with a dietitian and building trust with a dietitian to do what that dietitian told me to do, to eat what they told me to eat and follow their plan. And then working with the therapist the very next moment to actually process the complete sense of terror that comes along with letting go of the one thing that right? You think you have control of, but actually you have no control of at all. And then having a support system that wrapped around that. So having a community of people that would help me when I was struggling to execute on that plan that my dietitian had given me, having people in my life who would check in with me to see how I was doing, to keep me accountable, to help me be real. So that was a huge part of it to me. A huge part of it for me, too, was a spiritual part of it. And so it was this belief that I was created not to be encumbered by this forever, that freedom was a gift that was given to me to accept, and I needed to accept it. And so it was that ability to like accept grace for one, and to also extend grace to myself and to other people, and to believe that I was not actually created to have an eating disorder. I wasn't created to like be an anorexic or a bulimic. I was created to be free. And that led down an entire spiritual journey of like, what does that mean? And how do I embrace that? So I was also very fortunate to have therapists who would walk along with the spiritual journey too, and weren't afraid of going there with me.
Can I ask you if there was something pretty difficult going on in your life that maybe triggered some of this?
Oh, for sure. There definitely was. And I would say that some of what was going on in my life is that I did not have a lot of trauma growing up, that I had a very sort of normal, balanced, healthy, fun, right? Like happy childhood. And so I got to this point in my life where things did go wrong and I did not have the coping skills. I just had not had to build resilience. And so, where some people's stories with eating disorders is that they had trauma, right? Like even back to their earliest memories that led them from as long as they could remember trying to get a sense of control. That's not my story. My story is that I had a really happy life. And then I had this period of time in my life where everything was changing. My dad was really sick. I was leaving this wonderful college environment that I adored. And I knew what my next step was, but it was super intimidating and stressful and overwhelming. And I felt like I had some friends who sort of treated me in a way that was hurtful. And so I just had sort of this piling on. And I also had gained some weight my senior year of college. And so there was this intersection with not only are these things in my life spiraling out of control, but like I'm also gaining weight. And I didn't like that. And I'd never struggled with that because I'm a super active person. I sort of have a super slim, like kind of genetic body type. And so I was sort of stunned by that. And so that the weight gain is actually did trigger the first attempt to be like, I should lose about 10 pounds before my spring track season, right? Like I was a runner, and so that made perfect sense. But then the intersection with the eating disorder and the unpredictability, I had no way of knowing that attempt to lose a few pounds would spiral into something that was so out of control. And I think that's a major message that I would love for people to hear, our community, our audience to hear, is that so much of the stigma of any mental health condition is this feeling that we did something to cause it, or we should have been able to do things to prevent it. And one of the most powerful things ever said to me in my treatment was this therapist who asked me, if I had cancer, would I get treatment for it? And this still tears me up. And my answer was, of course I would. Like, why would I not? And so she asked me, well, why won't you get treatment for this eating disorder? And it made me realize that it was because I thought it was my fault. And there's just millions of people out there that feel the same way. And so what I've come to realize is that just like it's not your fault if you get cancer, right? It's not your fault if you get Alzheimer's or Parkinson's or any of these other like truly devastating physiological ailments, it's not your fault if you experience something like an eating disorder. There is an intersection with just living life and unknown, right? There's evidence that it's somewhat genetic, right? And so it's that I had no way of knowing that just watching what I ate a little bit would spiral into something that would take like 7 years of my life away from me.
I so appreciate your willingness to share your experience and take us with you. We can see and feel what you're struggling with to some extent, obviously not to a full extent. But we know also that there are millions of people who are going through this in some way or another. What are the numbers telling us about eating disorders in the United States?
Yeah, so the latest statistic that I saw is that something like 28 million Americans are like battle an eating disorder at some point in their life. And number one, that is a significant statistic, as is. In addition to that 28 million, what we know from our experience with Rock Recovery is that there are an incredible number of people out there. Probably for every person I meet who has a diagnosed eating disorder, I meet 10 people who struggle with the same types of things and don't connect the dots between that being an eating disorder. And so it's one of the reasons that Rock Recovery invests really significantly in community education and just programs around just awareness programs because they help people understand what they're going through. So one more very important statistic is that it's estimated that only 1 in 10 people actually get care. And that is a combination of accessibility, not being able to find the right therapist or dietitian, the person who specializes in this, who gets it, who can help, stigma, right? Just the guilt and shame and what I was describing as sense of it's my fault, so I don't deserve care. And also cost is just a huge barrier.
I'm really interested in understanding how you went from suffering the way you did with this disease to getting to a place where you could not only function well and be free of this, but also seek to help others. I'm really interested in knowing at what point you decided to take your experience to help others. Tell us about that.
Yeah, that's a great question. Sometimes I wonder if this was only my experience, if I would have been compelled to found an organization like Rock Recovery that does super complex work. It was not only my own experience, it was having friends from grade school all the way through college and seeing their experiences too. And part of that I did not personally experience but that so many of my friends experienced was the difficulty in sustaining recovery. So getting treatment, getting help, getting better, but not finding freedom. So better isn't freedom from an eating disorder. And so what would happen is that then something else in life would change, or just the constant stressors of school or social dynamics or work or whatever it is. And I've had friend after friend who cycled back through the same levels of care over and over and over. And so my heart is around bridging treatment gaps. And that's what Rock Recovery strives to do. Bridging treatment gaps, also bridging education gaps, understanding of eating disorders. My own personal intersection of that was after spending a month in a residential treatment center. I experienced firsthand how hard it is to make so much progress in your recovery, to feel like I can do this, I'm better here in this very structured environment. But can I actually go home, be on my own, not have this treatment team, and sustain this for the rest of my life? There was so much doubt in my own mind. And so I needed something like Rock Recovery. I needed a community-based program that would allow me to, right? 30 days off work is a lot. I was a working professional. You can't take years off of work if you're going to be an active member of society. So I wanted to go back. I wanted to start to work again. I wanted to be able to be with my husband, be with my friends, and have this robust community of supporters around me. And that did not exist. I could not find it anywhere in the United States, much less abroad. And so I talked to my therapist about it. I talked to my treatment team, and they all said, that's a great idea. That sounds perfect. That's exactly what's needed. It doesn't exist. And when you dig into why doesn't it exist, part of it is because there's no business model for that. It doesn't make money. People do not have the financial resources to pay for $40,000 1 month in treatment. That's just 1 month. I might need 6 months in treatment, and then to continue to go into a transitional sort of wraparound support system. So it doesn't make sense as a business model, but it is desperately needed within the community. And that's why I founded it as a nonprofit. That's why I knew that we would be heavily reliant on donors and financial supporters and partnerships with treatment centers, because it's not profitable to do this, but it is absolutely essential that we do this.
We talk about the types of problems that nonprofits engage in, and in many cases, they're problems that the marketplace hasn't found a way to make money from. And so these challenges go unaddressed. But there are organizations that can use the generosity of others to create these interventions to help with these persistent problems. There are probably always going to be people who have these eating disorders, and they're going to need help. Unfortunately, they're going to need help. And if no business can do it, then thank goodness there are organizations, at least one organization that is focused on that, which is yours. And my sense, Carrie, is that because of the types of changes that we're going through, the pace of change, you mentioned in your own experience, you were going through a lot of transition in your life. Well, people are going through transitions quite regularly now. Young people are coming along and they don't have the same sense of resilience that you talked about. Maybe they were, I'm going to use the phrase, coddled a little bit more than some of us who grew up more traumatized without the coddling, I guess, is probably a way to explore it. But when I think of young people today, they don't have the ability to transition from one thing to the next on their own in the same way that maybe previous generations did. And I know I'm overgeneralizing, but we see this in colleges and universities that report far more incidents of young people needing mental health assistance while they're in college. And so we know something is going on in our environment. We can see it around us. Just look at COVID. I bet your numbers went way up during COVID.
Yes, they skyrocketed.
Yeah. So these are problems in our society that we've never seen before. No wonder people are, struggling in different ways. And I wouldn't be surprised if their relationship with food was somewhat of a challenge right now, and therefore your work is going to be even more critical. I guess you're seeing that.
We really are. Within the first couple months of the pandemic, requests for our services jumped 400%. And then even when we averaged that out across a year, it was like 150%. It was significant, even without our ability to run our core in-person programs. So even though we were offering programs virtually, which some people would say it was so interesting, Art, because prior to the pandemic, we had tried to launch virtual programs and no one wanted them because we were trying to be more accessible to like remote areas, not just the city. No one wanted a remote program. But as soon as that was the only option, actually, it was incredibly well received and being a great avenue for being able to provide care when it was not available otherwise.
So let's talk about rock recovery for a bit. Give me a sense of the type of services that I might receive if I came to you for help.
Sure. I've referenced if you came to us for help, if you personally were seeking help, we have what we sort of call a core program, which is a quite robust gathering community of individuals, small groups of individuals. They come together either virtually or pre-post COVID in person to share a meal together, to process that meal together, and then to do other therapeutic activities that are specialized for eating disorders and the types of things that people with eating disorders struggle with. And so it's a once a week connection with a community, a stable community, not a come as you go, leave as you go, but a stable community, a once a week connection with a therapist, a dietitian. And then we are also, in the context of that program, able to connect with the other treatment providers of our clients and able to connect people with mentors, connect people with, we have a chaplain on staff for those who do want the spiritual care component. They can connect with our chaplain. So there's a robust program there. We also run things like yoga classes that are really, again, specialized with people that are sensitive with their body and that are self-conscious perhaps, or who have sort of disconnected their mind from their body and don't really have that mind-body connection so much. So it's not just a normal yoga class, right? Quite specialized. We offer a body image group that focuses in on body image. We offer a number of other things along those lines. And then sort of at the intersection of seeking help and then also community engagement and education, we have programs. One, for example, is called New ID, sort of like New Identity, that is an intersection between spiritual care and this topic of eating disorders and really helps people understand who they were created to be. And that's from a Christian perspective. Although you'll have to be Christian to show up, and lots of people come that don't have a tie to that faith, but find it so informative and to help them understand what they're going through. And we also have like breaking free groups that, again, are a bit more support group oriented, but are creating a safe community for people to continue their recovery. And that's just a handful.
Yeah. Well, somehow you focus on sitting down and having a meal together. Tell me about the power of just sitting down with other folk who are struggling with their relationship with food and having a meal together. What is the power that you draw from that?
Yeah, that's hugely powerful. And to that point, although that's an integral part of this core program, I should also mention that we are offering more and more simply meal support groups, like at noon Eastern, right? To be able to like dial in to a group that is helping you be accountable to having a healthy meal. And so it's the ability to hold yourself accountable to nourishing your body and having a community there who gets it, who understands and has no judgment for the fact that eating a sandwich might be terrifying for you, that might be extraordinarily difficult, that you might have all sorts of anxiety around that. Just normalizing it, and yet having the vision that things can get better, right? So normalizing in terms of no judgment, and yet we want you to be able to eat a sandwich and not think twice about it. In the context of our group, it's actually incredibly helpful to integrate the very trigger that is associated with eating disorders, which is food, right? That is the trigger, into a therapeutic process. So there is great strategy in this idea of sharing a meal together first. That's how the group opens. And then having a solid 2 hours to process not only what that meal brings up, but what is going on in people's lives and in their recovery. So the meal itself represents the trigger. And freedom is all about being able to remove that as a trigger, right? Food is no longer a trigger. If we're having a super healthy meal, I have no fear about being hungry later. If we are having a hamburger and French fries, I have no fear about what this is going to do to me, right? Like, I can do that. I can eat a hamburger and French fries once. It's not going to kill me. I might not choose to do that every day of the week, but I can do it once. And that's where we work with our clients, because our clients have a diversity of fears around food. It's not the same for every person.
Well, this is vitally important work. What types of support systems does the organization itself have? I suspect you rely quite a bit on donors to contribute. Are there volunteers and others that also play a role in delivering this work?
Yeah, it's a great question. So when we started as an all-volunteer organization. So I served as its founder, as its executive director for a number of years. I was never trying to do that as a full-time job or as a job at all. So I volunteered. All of our clinicians and our dietitians volunteered. All of our communications and event coordinators, all of those individuals were volunteers. Now we are much more stable as an organization in terms of being able to have on staff, right, consistent program directors, therapists. We still welcome and rely on interns as a way of both expanding the reach of our services, but also providing just a critical opportunity for people who are new to counseling and therapy to understand eating disorders, right? And so part of our mission and our ability to integrate like interns into our work is that we're helping them be tomorrow's treatment teams for eating disorders by getting early exposure. We're very, very grateful and very thankful for the corporate sponsors that we have. Many of our corporate sponsors are actually other treatment centers, so for-profit treatment centers that provide residential care or inpatient care, hospitalization levels of care. And I absolutely love that they see the importance of our work in bridging these treatment gaps, and they're willing to show up for us, not just as a cheerleader, but actually as financial sponsors and backers. And increasingly, we are looking to and receiving community grants and other, not just eating disorder, corporate sponsors who recognize that they may not know it, but statistics would suggest that at least 1 in 10 of their employees actually struggle with eating disorder. So doing something like sponsoring an eating disorder nonprofit sends a signal, right? It sends a signal that it's okay to struggle with something like this, that we have your back, that we support you, that we want you to get help. It's such an incredible thing for just any organization to do is to support a mental health nonprofit. And I would say that eating disorders are still one of the most stigmatized and therefore one of the most important to back and to send that message.
Okay, we're getting to the end of this interview, but I wanted to just give you an opportunity now to send a message to someone out there who may be listening who is struggling with this and they're not quite sure what to do next. Talk to them directly.
So I will start by saying that your struggle is real, that it is significant, that it matters, that your recovery and your freedom is possible, that recovery and freedom is possible, and that if you don't believe that for yourself, that you deserve to surround yourself with people that can believe it for you, to relentlessly reach out and find individuals that you can trust, that you will trust, that you'll extend trust to be part of your treatment team. And when they challenge you, to accept those challenges. I would say that I understand how ambivalent we can be about recovery, because sometimes recovery feels like someone is trying to take away the very thing that keeps us safe or helps us get through our day. But on the other side of recovery is this beautiful life where you are not encumbered by the daily anxiety and worry and just the prison that an eating disorder keeps you in. So there is absolutely this other side of it, and it's worth pursuing.
Carylynn Larson, founder of Rock Recovery, I want to thank you so much for joining us on this episode of the Heart of Giving podcast. And I'll just continue to hold you all in my thoughts because of this significantly important work that you're doing to help others help themselves, essentially, and live that life of freedom that you talk about. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Art.
And to all our listeners, I hope you'll subscribe or follow us on your favorite podcast platform. We'd also appreciate it if you would give us a positive review, especially on Apple Podcasts, because this will help us build audience. If you want to do a little bit more, you can become a sustaining donor to the Heart of Giving podcast on patreon.com. That's patreon.com. And also, finally, if you want to reach us, because we'd love to hear from you, please do so on Facebook, or you can just send us an email to heartofgivingpod@gmail.com. Thank you very much.
You've just listened to the Heart of Giving podcast with Art Taylor. Be sure to tune in next time for a brand new episode. To listen to our other interviews, visit heartgiving.podbean.com. That's heartgiving.podbean.com. Subscribe to our show on major podcast platforms. The thoughts and opinions expressed on this podcast are the views and opinions of the guests, not those of the BBB Wise Giving Alliance or program affiliates. This podcast is for information and educational purposes only and is copyrighted with all rights reserved. This podcast is protected by Podbean's terms of service.